La conferencia de prensa en la Casa Blanca entre Donald Trump y el presidente de Ucrania, Volodymyr Zelensky, no fue un simple acto diplomático. Fue una muestra cruda de contradicciones, confusión y un mensaje peligroso para la política. Trump, que ha pasado meses atacando públicamente a Zelensky en redes sociales, intentó suavizar su discurso frente a las cámaras, pero en el intento dejó frases que exponen su inconsistencia y su visión distorsionada de la guerra en Ucrania. Queremos recordarte algo rápidamente. Si te está gustando el video, no olvides suscribirte, darle like y comentar, que nos ayuda mucho. Dicho esto, pasamos al video.
And I think progress is being made, very substantial progress in many ways. We had a good meeting, as you know, just a short while ago with the president of Russia. And I think there's a possibility that something could come out of it. And today's meeting is very important. We have, I guess, the seven very powerful leaders from Europe. And we're going to be meeting with them right after this meeting. And thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. If I can, first of all, thank you for invitation and thank you very much for your efforts, personal efforts to stop killings and stop this war. Thank you. And using this opportunity, many thanks to your wife, First Lady of the United States. She sent a letter to Putin about our children, abducted children, and my wife, she, First Lady of Ukraine, she gave the letter. It's not to you, to your wife.
Oh, I want it.
Yeah. So we are saying this sensitive topic, yes, please. And thanks to our partners and that you supported this format, that after our meeting we can have leaders who are around us, UK, France, Germany, Italy, Finland, EU, NATO, I mean all partners around Ukraine supporting us. Thanks to them and thank you very much for invitation.
Thank you very much for being here.
President Trump.
Do you think it's fair?
Yes, Peter, go ahead.
Thank you, President Trump. So, President Zelensky, you say in a post on X today, Russia must end this war, which it itself started. President Trump, you say President Zelensky of Ukraine can end the war with Russia almost immediately if he wants to. Which is it?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think we're going to have a meeting. I think if everything works out well today, we'll have a trilat. And I think there will be a reasonable chance of ending the war when we do that.
And is this the end of the road for American support for Ukraine? Is today's meeting deal or no deal?
I can never say that. It's never the end of the road. People are being killed and we want to stop that. So I would not say it's the end of the road. No, I think we have a good chance of doing it. It's been almost 4 years now that a lot of people were killed last week. A lot of people last week. I mean, millions of people killed, but a lot of people last week for whatever reason. A big number, a lot of soldiers, on both sides. And I know the president, I know myself, and I believe Vladimir Putin wants to see it ended.
And as you met with Putin on Friday, today you've got President Zelensky here. As you listen to Russia and Ukraine, which side has the better cards? Right?
Well, I don't want to say that. I'm just here to be, look, this isn't my war. This is Joe Biden's war. He's the one that had a lot to do with this happening, and we want to get it ended. And we want it to end good for everybody. We want it to end good. The people of Ukraine have suffered incredibly.
And to that point, President Zelensky, are you prepared to keep sending Ukrainian troops to their deaths for another couple years, or are you going to agree to redraw the maps?
Thank you for your question. So, first of all, we live under each day attacks. That today have been a lot of attacks and a lot of wounded people, and the child was dead, small one year and a half. So we need to stop this war, to stop Russia, and we need support, American and European partners, and we will do our best for this. So, and I think we show that we are strong people, and we supported the idea of the United States, personally of President Trump, to stop this war, to make a diplomatic way of finishing this war, and we are ready for trilateral, as President said. This is a good signal about trilateral. I think this is very good. Thank you.
Mr. President,
yes, if the peace deal will be achieved, are you going to be willing to send American peacekeepers to Ukraine?
But we're going to work with Ukraine, we're going to work with everybody, and we're going to make sure that if there's peace, the peace is going to stay long term. This is very long term. We're not talking about a 2-year peace and then we end up in this mess again. We're going to make sure that everything's good. We'll work with Russia, we're going to work with Ukraine, and we're going to make sure it works. And I think if we can get to peace, it's going to work. I have no doubt about it.
Your team has talked about security guarantees. Could that involve U.S. troops? Would you roll that out in the future?
We'll let you know that maybe later today. We're meeting with 7 great leaders of great countries also, and we'll be talking about that. They'll all be involved, but there'll be a lot of help. When it comes to security, there's going to be a lot of help. It's going to be good. They are first line of defense because they're there. They're Europe. But we're going to help them out also. We'll be involved.
Mr. President, Vladimir Putin mentioned that the war will not end without addressing the root causes of this war. Have you had an understanding what are the root causes of this war?
Well, look, the war is going to end. When it ends, I can't tell you, but the war is going to end, and this gentleman wants it to end, and Vladimir Putin wants it to end. I think the whole world is tired of it, and we're going to get it ended. It was, I've done 6 wars. I've ended 6 wars, and I thought this maybe would be the easiest one, and it's not the easiest one. It's a tough one. A lot of reasons for it, and they'll be talking about it for a long time. But they'll be talking about the others. Look, India, Pakistan. We're talking about the big places. When you look at, you just take a look at some of these wars. You go to Africa and take a look at that. Rwanda and the Congo, Republic of the Congo. That's been going on for 31 years. And so we've done a total of 6, and we really have 6, not including the fact that we obliterated, and it turned out to be a total obliteration, the nuclear, as you said, the future nuclear capability of Iran. And this one, I think we're going to get solved also. I feel confident we're going to get it solved.
I'd like guarantees or special envoy put forward.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Lo que acabamos de ver es más que un acto fallido de diplomacia. Es un síntoma del vacío estratégico de Trump. Primero, minimiza la importancia del cese al fuego, dejando entrever que no es esencial en este momento, algo que contradice cualquier lógica humanitaria o política. Luego, asegura que tanto él como Putin quiere terminar la guerra, ignorando por completo la realidad. La agresión rusa no se detiene por voluntad propia, sino por resistencia ucraniana y presión internacional. Además, el presidente vuelve a utilizar el mismo recurso que ha repetido durante años: culpar a Joe Biden. Llama a la guerra en Ucrania la guerra de Biden, desligándose de cualquier responsabilidad y al mismo tiempo presentándose como el único capaz de resolverla. Esto es un patrón bastante recurrente en su discurso: trasladar las culpas y presentarse como mediador, incluso cuando sus palabras lo desmienten. Lo más preocupante, sin embargo, no es la incoherencia, sino la falta de claridad. Trump habla de 6 guerras que ya resolvió durante su mandato, un dato sin sustento, mezclando conflictos de regiones distintas y hasta confundiendo episodios históricos. Este tipo de declaraciones no son simples errores, son un intento deliberado de construir una situación de poder, aunque los hechos lo contradigan. La conferencia también mostró el contraste de Zelensky. Mientras el presidente ucraniano habló de vidas perdidas, niños abatidos y la necesidad urgente de apoyo internacional, Trump hablaba en términos de cálculos políticos y de su rol en la historia. Este contraste es el que marca la diferencia entre un líder en medio de una guerra real y un político que busca capitalizarla para sus propios fines. Este encuentro no acercó la paz, más bien dejó claro que bajo liderazgo de Trump, la diplomacia estadounidense estaría marcada por ambigüedad, autopromoción y concesiones peligrosas hacia Moscú. Y lo que queda en evidencia es que Zelensky no busca solo palabras, sino garantías concretas, mientras Trump sigue anclado en la retórica. Pero déjame saber qué opinan ustedes. ¿Creen que Trump realmente tiene un plan para resolver el conflicto en Ucrania o simplemente busca posicionarse políticamente? No olviden suscribirse, darle like y compartir este análisis. Esto es Rumor de Estado. Donald Trump ha vuelto a demostrar que su prioridad no es la paz internacional ni la estabilidad de sus aliados, sino la manipulación política a su conveniencia. Y en esa estrategia, uno de los más perjudicados es su propio vicepresidente, a quien ha colocado en una situación imposible, mediar en un conflicto para el que no tiene ni experiencia ni respaldo. Lo que a simple vista parece una misión diplomática, en realidad es un movimiento calculado para debilitar a un posible rival dentro de su propio partido. Queremos hacerte un recordatorio rápido. Si te está gustando el video, no olvides darle like, suscribirte y comentar este video que nos ayuda mucho. Dicho esto, pasamos a video.
In Alaska with Vladimir Putin, which accomplished nothing other than distracting news media attention from Donald Trump's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, Donald Trump said this.
I want to see a ceasefire rapidly. I don't know if it's going to be today, but I'm not going to be happy if it's not today.
There was no ceasefire on Friday, but Donald Trump still said that he was happy after his meeting with Vladimir Putin, which was widely declared a failure, even in some Trump-supporting media. And 72 hours after saying, I want to see a ceasefire rapidly. I don't know if it's going to be today, but I'm not going to be happy if it's not today. Donald Trump said this today.
I don't think you need a ceasefire. I like the concept of a ceasefire for one reason, because you'd stop killing people immediately, as opposed to in 2 weeks or 1 week or whatever it takes. But we can work a deal where we're working on a peace deal while they're fighting. They have to fight. I wish they could stop. I'd like them to stop. But strategically, that could be a disadvantage for one side or the other.
They have to fight. There's Donald Trump saying they have to fight. Donald Trump, who has given up even trying to get a ceasefire, after trying for less than a day to get a ceasefire, now says they have to fight. No, they don't. They were not fighting until Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine, thereby winning Vladimir Putin the legal status of war.
Lo que podemos observar aquí no es una improvisación, es algo que continuamente está sucediendo. Trump plantea exigencias que después contradice, anulando cualquier posibilidad de coherencia. No busca resultados concretos en Ucrania, lo que busca es tiempo, titulares y una situación que le permita desviar la atención de otros escándalos que lo rodean. Esta inconsistencia no solo socava la diplomacia estadounidense, también coloca a J.D. Vance en un callejón sin salida, asumir la responsabilidad de una tarea condenada al fracaso.
What we said to the Europeans is simply, first of all, this is in your neck of the woods, this is in your back door. You guys have got to step up and take a bigger role in this thing. And if you care so much about this conflict, you should be willing to play a more direct and a more substantial way in funding this war yourself. I think the president, and I certainly think that America, we're done with the funding of the Ukraine war business. We want to bring about a peaceful settlement to this thing. We want to stop the killing. But Americans, I think, are sick of continuing to send their money, their tax dollars to this particular conflict. But if the Europeans want to step up and actually buy the weapons from American producers, we're okay with that, but we're not going to fund it ourselves anymore.
What about Israel?
Aquí se percibe una incoherencia central. Vance sostiene que el problema es europeo, que Estados Unidos debería seguir financiando esta guerra, pero Trump, lejos de reforzar esta visión, lo designa como negociador principal en un proceso que inevitablemente exige compromisos de Washington. Esto no es una coincidencia, es una forma de cargar sobre Vance un fracaso anunciado y al mismo tiempo limitar su futuro político. Algunos analistas lo comparan con lo ocurrido en su momento con Kamala Harris y la crisis migratoria. Asignaciones imposibles que se convierten en trampas políticas. En este caso, la jugada tiene un doble filo. Si Vance fracasa, quedará marcado como un experto incapaz de manejar asuntos internacionales. Pero si logra algún avance, inevitablemente tendrá que contradecir su discurso político contra la intervención en Ucrania. En ambos escenarios, pierde. Mientras tanto, Trump atraviesa uno de los momentos de mayor desgaste político. Sus índices de aprobación caen, incluso en estados sólidamente republicanos, y los escándalos ligados al caso Epstein erosionan aún más su credibilidad. En este contexto, sacrificar la figura emergente de J.D. Vance no es un error, es parte de su estrategia de supervivencia. Para Trump, ningún aliado es intocable. Todos son piezas prescindibles en su propio poder.
Of an age-old principle that you can fool some of the people all of the time, and all of the people some of the time, but you cannot. You cannot fool all of the people all of the time. Donald Trump, take notes, because right now the American people are mad at you. Call it a reckoning if you want. Not just for Trump, but for those lawmakers who've hitched their wagons to the MAGA movement. Tomorrow will make it 7 months since Trump's second term began. I know it feels like 11 years. His report card, though, is so bad it's going to need a signature from a parent. Overall, according to Pew, his approval rating is in the dumps, with just 38% of all Americans on his side. That compares to 60% who disapprove of Donald Trump's performance as president. It's a near record low for him. On tariffs, which are the signature tool of his economic masterminding, he's 23 points underwater on tariffs. On foreign policy, amid the pomp and circumstance, amid a flurry of meetings with European leaders, Trump is 14 points underwater right now. And on his administration's handling of the Jeffrey Epstein controversy, largely ginned up by his own coalition and base of core supporters, Pew says just 25% of all Americans approve of how he's handling that. And it compares to 70% who do not approve of how Donald Trump is handling the Jeffrey Epstein files. Before you write any of that off as a small matter, go beyond the numbers. Look at what elected Republicans are hearing about the so-called Epstein files. This is from Wyoming. Wyoming is a state Donald Trump won by nearly 50 points a few months ago.
I don't know if that vote's going to come up on the floor, but what a lot of people don't realize is that is for the courts to decide.
So you're not going to give us an answer on
it is for the courts to decide. Those files are sealed. It is for the courts to decide whether the files can be released.
And they're declining
it is a separation of powers issue. It is for the courts to decide.
Grand jury transcripts aren't going to get released, right?
I can't.
There seems to be a lot of sentiment in the House, on the right and the left, to see what's in those Jeffrey Epstein files. Do you support the release of those files?
I support. It's up to the courts to decide. It is up to the courts to decide.
Thank you.
It's up to the courts to decide.
En definitiva, lo que vemos no es un intento real de construir paz, sino una jugada política interna que debilita a su propio vicepresidente y expone una vez más la fragilidad del liderazgo del presidente. Y ahora yo les pregunto a ustedes, ¿creen que Trump realmente busca un acuerdo de paz en Ucrania o solo está usando el conflicto para su beneficio personal? ¿Puede J.D. Vance sobrevivir políticamente a esa trampa que le tendió su propio jefe? No olviden suscribirse, dejar su like, compartir este video que nos ayuda mucho. Recuerden, esto es El Rumor de Estado.
El episodio de hoy examina 3 vectores que convergen en un mismo punto: la salud como narrativa política, el uso del aparato estatal contra adversarios y la instrumentalización de la vida privada para desviar la conversación pública. El punto de partida no es la oposición, sino una voz afín al trumpismo que introduce dudas de la condición del presidente. Luego, la respuesta del sistema político frente a los allanamientos a John Bolton y, finalmente, el comentario del propio presidente sobre pertenencias de su esposa, convertido en munición mediática. Nuestro foco es el encuadre, no el morbo, cómo se construyen percepciones, cómo circulan y qué efectos tienen en la agenda. Como breve recordatorio, pedirte que por favor nos puedas dar un like, comentar tu opinión y te suscribas. Vamos con la noticia.
Jones, aforementioned Alex Jones, has some concerns about his president that I'd like to share with you.
Trump has got great genetics. He's tough. And if he takes care of himself, he can make it through these years and then after. But if he doesn't, he's going to have, I predict Trump is going to have some type of collapse within the next 12 months at the current trajectory.
So he's going to, a collapse is coming in the next 12 months for Trump.
Did you watch this whole segment, by the way?
I've got more. More is to come. First, I want to know if you have any thoughts about the collapse coming in the next 12 months.
It sounds exciting. First, I'm thrilled to hear it. Alex Jones was ahead of the curve probably on all things Biden's health. Unfortunately, we should probably admit that.
That's a good point.
We should probably admit that.
The ankles from Alaska, they're straight on shot. They are big. They are swollen. I mean, they are like really big. I mean, they look like my neck's 19 and a half inches.
That's a big neck.
Like that. His ankles look like they're about 15 inches around. That's not a good sign for the heart and the rest of the body, because the rest of him, he's lost weight. He's not that fat. So Trump really needs to exercise and take care of himself. Yeah, that's not good.
Oh, someone make a TikTok audio out of that. That is good.
Please.
The cankles are getting fucking thick.
Cuando una figura que suele respaldar al presidente instala dudas sobre su estado, el relato deja de ser exclusivamente ataque de la prensa y se vuelve señal desde dentro del propio ecosistema. Políticamente, esta narrativa cumple dos funciones: presiona a la Casa Blanca a exhibir vigor y desplaza la conversación desde investigaciones y decisiones de gobierno hacia el terreno de la biografía. El riesgo para el presidente es evidente. Si su círculo mediático no alinea mensajes, los críticos obtienen validación externa sin necesidad de aportar pruebas clínicas. La prensa, por su parte, enfrenta un dilema ético: cubrir sin caer en especulación médica o ignorar un debate que ya permea a su audiencia.
This episode is disturbing, and it seems to confirm Bolton's own prediction that if Donald Trump got back into office, his administration would be consumed with vengeance and retribution against his perceived political enemies. They stripped John Bolton of his security detail on the first day of the administration, I believe. They stripped him of his security clearance. He was listed on Kash Patel's so-called enemies list. And it seems as if perhaps the president was not pleased with what Bolton was saying during the course of the big summit with Vladimir Putin here in the United States in Alaska. And he was reminding everybody that Vladimir Putin had one goal, which was to capture Ukraine and reabsorb it into the newly reconstituted Russian Empire. So obviously that got on Donald Trump's nerves, and I think we can see the result of it here. At least, based on the information I've got, this looks like it's very much in line with the other acts of political retribution and vengeance exacted against Bolton.
Los allanamientos de Bolton no ocurren en el vacío, se insertan en una segunda presidencia definida por promesas explícitas de revancha y por un discurso que sitúa al presidente como jefe de la aplicación de la ley. Esa autodefinición, sumada a declaraciones públicas contra adversarios, contamina la percepción de independencia judicial incluso si las órdenes son legalmente válidas. El resultado es un marco de interpretación polarizado. Para unos una rendición de cuentas y para otros un castigo selectivo. En términos de manipulación mediática, la secuencia, ataque verbal, luego acción estatal y por último una justificación pública, crea un ciclo de cobertura que margina asuntos programáticos y normaliza el conflicto como un único eje de la política. Aquí les tengo el post que se los voy a traducir y pues dice así: Trump hace una broma de mal gusto sobre los cajones de su esposa. Los comentarios del presidente se produjeron en respuesta a una pregunta sobre la redada del FBI en la casa de John Bolton. Donald Trump hizo una broma de mal gusto sobre que el FBI revisó los cajones de su esposa mientras intentaba distanciarse de la redada contra el ex asesor de seguridad nacional John Bolton, hablando en el despacho Oval después de que agentes descendieran sobre la casa de Bolton en Maryland la mañana del viernes. Trump insistió una vez más en que no tenía nada que ver con la investigación contra su némesis de larga data, pero el presidente también mencionó que la redada del FBI llevó a cabo en su residencia de Mar-a-Lago en agosto de 2022, cuando el entonces candidato republicano era objeto de una investigación del Departamento de Justicia de Biden por el presunto manejo indebido de documentos clasificados. Trump estaba furioso por la ejecución de la orden de registro en ese momento, afirmando que los agentes del FBI habían hurgado entre la ropa de la primera dama Melania Trump y sus efectos personales y luego dejaron el área hecha un desastre. Pero al relatar el episodio del viernes, el presidente hizo un comentario algo de mal gusto, diciéndoles a los reporteros: revisaron todo lo que pudieron, incluido el cuarto de mi hijo pequeño en el área de mi esposa. Revisaron sus cajones. Como dice la expresión, ella es muy ordenada, ¿sabes? Es meticulosa, añadió Trump, y cuando ella regresó miró y dijo: wow, esto no era como ella lo tenía, así que conozco la sensación, no es una buena sensación. La redada de Mar-a-Lago finalmente llevó a que se acusara a Trump de 37 cargos federales, la mayoría de los cuales estaban relacionados con la retención deliberada del material clasificado en violación de la ley de espionaje. Entonces, más allá del tono, la elección de palabras no es inocente. El mandatario intenta tomar distancia de decisiones investigativas controvertidas recurriendo a una escena doméstica que despierta indignación por excesos del Estado. El encuadre es eficaz porque traslada la discusión del plano institucional al plano íntimo. Desde el punto de vista mediático, la referencia a Melania funciona como anzuelo de cobertura. Lo privado domina titulares y desplaza preguntas de fondo sobre custodia de documentos y cadenas de resguardo.
Trying to get justice for the victims and transparency for America.
The president should say, I ran on this, the attorney general promised this, we're going to do a clean, full release.
That was California Democratic Congressman Ro Khanna and Kentucky Republican Thomas Massie after Speaker Mike Johnson sent Congress into recess last month. Remember that? Instead of holding a vote to compel the Department of Justice to publicly release files relating to now deceased convicted child sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Well, today, as the House Oversight Committee got its first batch of Epstein documents, members in both parties are still looking for more answers. And joining me now is Congressman Ro Khanna, Democrat from California, member of the House Oversight Committee. All right, you got the transcript of the Maxwell interview and the recording and some documents, so fully transparent and we're done, right? Everything all good?
Well, Donald Trump is out there saying, release the Epstein files, and then he's calling himself the chief law enforcement officer, but he's not releasing the Epstein files. We got less than 1%, you know? I mean, we got less than 1% of the documents. The FBI said there are 300 gigabytes of these documents. We got 1 gigabyte, about 33,000 pages. To put that in perspective, usually in a major investigation, you get about 1 million pages. And most of these pages are already public documents. So they're stonewalling. What we really need to do when we come back is have a vote on Massie and my bill to force the release. The Speaker, as you mentioned, shut down Congress to avoid that vote, but he's not going to keep shutting down Congress. We just need to vote on that.
That point, it's an important point, right? Because we're long past the AG is independent, the Department of Justice. Trump does everything flows from him. He says it. This morning he kind of hedged a little bit in his sort of classic self-contradictory way. But here's what he said about the documents and how he told his attorney general to, quote, give them everything. Take a listen.
I have said to Pam and everybody else, give them everything you can give them, because it's a Democrat hoax.
It's a Democrat hoax. Are you confident that everything will come over, or do you think they're just blowing smoke?
Well, so far they've been blowing smoke. We got less than 1% of the documents. And, you know, this is not just Democrats. This is Massie. This is Boebert. This is Marjorie Taylor Greene. This is Tim Burchett. It's like the all-star lineup of the MAGA movement that's demanding this. Even Kevin Comer, the oversight chair, is demanding this. So the reality is that Trump is saying one thing because he knows that his base wants to hear that. But obviously he hasn't told Pam Bondi to do that because they haven't released the documents, and they're just still hoping this thing just goes away. It's not going to go away.
I want to play you a little clip of this Ghislaine Maxwell interview. Again, I think we've been pretty focused on what one's assessment of its credibility should be. She says that she never saw Trump do anything untoward, that he was a perfect gentleman, also that he was always kind to her and she admires him and what he's been able to accomplish, that she never saw Jeffrey Epstein engage in any non-consensual anything, that the massages weren't sexual. Here she says she kind of has exculpatory account for everyone. Take a listen to this one sentence she says.
I never, ever saw any man doing something inappropriate with a woman of any age.
To remind everyone, that's Jeffrey Epstein's accomplice. I never, ever saw any man doing something inappropriate with a woman of any age. Do you find that credible?
You know, I'm usually pretty even-keeled, but I was so offended and outraged when I heard her say that. And the reason is I've been in touch with the victims' lawyers. 10 of them are going to actually be sharing their stories on September 3rd. I mean, it is so offensive, so insulting to the hundreds of victims who our country has sidelined for years. They haven't been centered. And for Maxwell to get up there and say that nothing was done to them, I mean, she's going to be shocked when she hears the stories on September 3rd. But I'm so angered for the victims whose stories and testimony is being dismissed.
We also do know, I mean, part of the thing about these files, right, we do know, at least from reporting, that the department that flagged mentions of him and that he was told in May his name is among many in the Epstein files. I mean, one of the tests, it seems to me, is like whether we see anything in these files we haven't seen before that mentions Donald Trump, frankly.
Absolutely. And we also have a subpoena to the Epstein estate to get the birthday book. But you notice how Trump, he says, well, I want to release everything, but I'm really concerned because some of my friends and some of the people I know may be mentioned in these files. Yeah. Really? That's your concern? The embarrassment of your buddies as opposed to justice and closure for the victims? I mean, it is just absurd at this point, and this is the one issue where his base is pushing back. I mean, they haven't pushed back on deporting people without due process. They haven't pushed back on taking away cancer research. They haven't pushed back on cutting Medicaid.
Aquí aparece la contradicción central. El presidente ha dicho entréguenlo todo sobre Epstein, sintonizando con el deseo de transparencia de su base. Sin embargo, el Congreso no ha materializado una liberación completa y las agendas solo han difundido piezas parciales, como los más de 300 folios de la entrevista reciente a Ghislaine Maxwell, lo que alimenta sospechas de control político de la información. Comunicación estratégica y gestión institucional reman en direcciones distintas. El mensaje público promete apertura, el proceso arroja goteos. Esa disonancia erosiona la credibilidad y deja vía libre a teorías que ocupan el vacío. Si este análisis les fue útil, les agradeceríamos que se suscriban, dejen su me gusta, comenten su opinión y compartan el video. Sin nada más que decir, nos vemos en el siguiente Rumor de Estado.
Some violent, crazy people who are screaming at kids with a few crazy liberals who are screaming at the vice president. But I think that's a very worthwhile trade to make because we want our people to be able to enjoy our beautiful cities. It's kind of crazy. You hear these guys outside. They appear to hate the idea that Americans...
Lo que acaba de ocurrir es impactante. La escena que se vio a continuación parecía pensada para reforzar una imagen de autoridad. El vicepresidente J.D. Vance, acompañado de altos funcionarios repartiendo hamburguesas a tropas de la Guardia Nacional desplegadas en la Unión de Estación en pleno corazón de Washington. Sin embargo, lo que debía ser un acto de control político se convirtió en un momento de humillación pública. Vance fue recibido con abucheos y gritos de rechazo, un contraste evidente con la situación oficial de que las calles de la capital estaban más seguras que nunca.
This is the guy who thinks people don't deserve law and order in their own community.
Mr. Vice President, how did it go?
El problema no fue solo la reacción ciudadana. Lo más significativo es el mensaje que este despliegue envía sobre la relación entre la Casa Blanca y la capital del país. Donald Trump decidió federalizar el Departamento de Policía Metropolitana de Washington y ordenar la movilización de la Guardia Nacional, alegando una emergencia de seguridad. La contradicción es evidente. Mientras los datos oficiales muestran que la criminalidad en Washington está en su punto más bajo en décadas, el gobierno insiste en vender la idea de una ciudad sumida en caos.
Some violent, crazy people who are screaming at kids with a few crazy liberals who are screaming at the vice president. But I think that's a very worthwhile trade to make because we want our people to be able to enjoy our beautiful cities. And the last thing I'll say is to the American people, D.C. is already safer than it was 9 days ago, but we're going to make it safer still to come. This is your city. You should feel free to come and visit here, have a meal, see all these incredible monuments, and actually enjoy yourself. And that's what we're trying to make happen. And I think that if we set a standard in Washington, D.C., that political willpower can bring some common sense, law and order back to these communities, then maybe some other communities and other cities will follow suit. So it's kind of crazy. You hear these guys outside. They appear to hate the idea that Americans can enjoy their communities, and they do the fact that D.C. a week ago had a higher murder rate than Trinidad and Tobago, which the United States State Department has said you shouldn't visit because it's unsafe. We ought to be able to enjoy great American cities. That's what we're trying to do in the Trump administration.
Esto revela la verdadera motivación detrás de la maniobra. No se trata de seguridad pública, sino de estrategia política y control mediático. Trump recorre un viejo recurso, exagerar la amenaza de la criminalidad para justificar el uso de fuerza y proyectarse como el único grande del orden. Pero en este caso, el contexto es aún más delicado. Críticos han señalado que la emergencia fabricada coincide con la presión creciente para publicar documentos relacionados con el caso Epstein, un escándalo que la Casa Blanca busca mantener fuera del centro de atención.
Complete and total lawlessness. And we're getting rid of the slums too. We have slums here. We're getting rid of them. I know it's not politically correct. You'll say, oh, so terrible. No, we're getting rid of the slums where they live.
Well, he's referring to a provision in the D.C. Home Rule Act, which allows him to declare a police emergency relating to a federal matter. They haven't defined what the emergency is, especially with crime rates at a 30-year low in the District of Columbia. And he's deployed the National Guard. At least I'm happy to see that he acknowledges he has the power to activate the National Guard. That was what he refused to do 4.5 years ago when the Capitol and his own vice president and Congress were under attack by the mob violence that he unleashed against us. And he sat on his hands for many hours and then later asserted he somehow didn't have the authority to deploy the National Guard. That was a real emergency. This is not a real emergency. He was not asked to send in the National Guard or take over the police by the House or the Senate or the mayor or the DC Council. This looks to me like an emergency which is manufactured because of a public relations crisis relating to the Epstein file. He doesn't want to release the Epstein file, so he wants everybody to look in.
La puesta en escena de Vance en la Estación Unión ilustra otro aspecto central, cómo Trump utiliza a su propio vicepresidente como escudo político. Le asigna un papel de vocero en un terreno sumamente hostil, sin respaldo ciudadano y con un mensaje que se contradice con las cifras oficiales. El resultado es predecible, un vicepresidente debilitado, percibido como poco preparado y obligado a sostener un discurso de que la realidad desmiente. Una vez más, la lealtad a Trump se traduce en desgaste político para aquellos que lo rodean.
We're here making Los Angeles a safer place since we won't have politicians. We do that ourselves.
About the fact that we're affirming our independent commission, and we're calling for a national independent commission as well. Well, I think it's pretty sick and pathetic. And it just said everything you need to know, the setting that we're under. That they chose the time, manner, and place to send their district director outside right when we're about to have this press conference. It said everything you know about Donald Trump's America. And that was top down. You know that for a fact. They'll deny it, I'm sure. Maybe they won't deny it. Said everything you know about the authoritarian tendencies of the President of the United States. I said in a moment ago, wake up, America. Wake up. You will not have a country if he rigs this election. You will have a president who will be running for a third term. Mark my word. I wasn't exaggerating when I said that I received in the mail a Trump 2028 hat from one of his biggest supporters. These guys are not screwing around. The rules do not apply to him. The most corrupt president in history. Doesn't believe in free enterprise, crony capitalism. He is wrecking this country, wrecking the economy. He's a lawless president. Wake up, America.
Lo ocurrido en Washington no es solamente un episodio anecdótico. Refleja cómo la manipulación sobre la seguridad pública puede convertirse en un instrumento de poder. A través de la creación de emergencia inexistente, se justifica el uso de fuerzas federales y se erosiona la autonomía de la ciudad, desplazando la atención de problemas que el propio gobierno quiere evitar. Y yo te pregunto a ti, ¿creen que este despliegue de las tropas de Washington responde a un verdadero problema de seguridad? ¿O es una estrategia política de distracción? ¿Hasta qué punto el caos urbano se convierte en una herramienta de manipulación para justificar medidas autoritarias? Si este análisis les ha parecido útil, les invitamos a suscribirse, darle a like al video, comentar y compartirlo para seguir ampliando esta conversación sobre el poder y la manipulación política en Estados Unidos. Esto es Rumor de Estado. Lo que ocurrió en Washington no es simplemente un acto político. Es la consolidación de un modelo de poder que Donald Trump está imponiendo bajo la apariencia de recuperar el orden. Mientras que la ciudad registra índices de criminalidad en mínimos históricos, la Casa Blanca insiste en describirla como un territorio fuera de control. Esta contradicción revela el verdadero objetivo: crear un clima de miedo para justificar un control autoritario sobre la capital del país. Antes de pasar al video, queremos recordarte que si te está gustando lo que estás viendo, puedes darle like, suscribirte y comentar, que nos ayuda mucho. Dicho esto,
But we've had a great period of time, but I've never received so many phone calls thanking me for what we've done in Washington, D.C., from people that haven't gone to a restaurant literally in 4 years. And they said, you know, what you've done it's unprecedented, because what they said it was just unsafe. We couldn't do it. We'd go out and you'd see the stories, you'd read the stories, you'd see all of the things that are happening. And they said, we couldn't stand it, sir. And now I take my wife and my kids to dinner. One of them said he's gone out 4 nights in a row, and he hadn't gone out for 4 years. So it's a great tribute to you. And when I look at you people, I understand why, because there's no games, right? We're not playing games.
Durante su discurso ante policías en Washington, Trump intentó presentarse como el artífice de un supuesto renacimiento urbano. Habló de restaurantes que, según él, han vuelto a llenarse gracias a su gestión, cuando en realidad las cifras muestran lo contrario. La asistencia a establecimientos ha caído drásticamente, en gran parte por la presencia de fuerzas federales y el temor ciudadano. No es seguridad lo que percibe la gente, sino un clima de hostigamiento y desconfianza.
People are now coming in, they're making reservations to come in, they want to be in Washington, D.C. One of the things we're going to be redoing is your parks. I'm very good at grass because I have a lot of golf courses all over the place. I know more about grass than any human being, I think, anywhere in the world. And we're going to be regrassing all of your parks, all brand new sprinkler systems, the best that you can buy, just like Augusta. It'll look like Augusta. It'll look like, more importantly, Trump National Golf Club. That's even better. But we're going to have all brand new, beautiful grass. You know, like everything else, grass has a life. Do you know that? Grass has a life. You know, we have a life and grass has a life. And the grass here died about 40 years ago. So we're going to be rebuilding all of your parks, and it's going to happen fast. It's going to go up like a miracle.
Más revelador aún es el desvío de su discurso hacia asuntos banales como el césped de los parques o la estética de la ciudad. Lejos de concentrarse en políticas públicas reales, Trump utiliza la retórica de la decoración para disfrazar una intervención política mucho más profunda. La federalización de las instituciones locales y el uso de las Fuerzas Armadas como instrumento de control. Esta situación busca normalizar la idea de que la capital puede convertirse en un escenario bajo las reglas excepcionales, sin debate público ni rendición de cuentas.
Todd Blanche, who's been with me so long, and he's one of the best lawyers you'll ever find. And we're having a lot of victories. I had a victory today. You know, they stole $550 million from me with a fake case, and it was overturned. They said this was a fake case. It's a terrible thing, but that's a nice victory, you know. I mean, it's not bad. You know, we all have our limits, but this was a terrible thing that done. It was a witch hunt, and I've had more witch hunts than any human being, I think, in history. And here we are, we're the president of the United States, so it didn't work out too well for them, but maybe now it's turned a little bit. These are very dishonest people. We have to fight, we have to win, because we have to win. And you people are winners, and I just think it's such an honor to be with you, and we're going to make Washington, D.C. great again. We're making our country great again. The country is very close to being great. When they say it's the hottest country in the world, they mean it. And this capital is right now, after 4 days, 5 days, it's at a level.
Pero lo más llamativo fue la incapacidad de Trump para conectar, incluso con su propia audiencia. Entre divagaciones sobre demandas judiciales, ataques personales, su discurso se volvió incoherente, generando silencio y desconcierto entre los oficiales presentes. El contraste es evidente. Mientras intenta proyectar autoridad, lo que transmite es desorden, fragilidad y un estilo de gobierno marcado por intereses personales. Y al mismo tiempo, deja clara su intención de revertir compromisos energéticos para volver a un modelo basado en combustibles fósiles, ignorando por completo las prioridades climáticas del país.
Utility, because we have old grids, we have a lot of stuff that's old. We wouldn't be able to compete with China AI. And now we're totally leading the AI race and the artificial intelligence. It's a big deal. And it's the hottest thing there is for probably in 35, 40 years. It's a lot of people don't know what it is. Just trust me, it's very hot. It's big. But they need massive amounts of electricity. They need more electricity than we have right now in the whole country servicing everything. In other words, we have to at least double it up to be competitive and to be.
Lo ocurrido en Washington muestra que el miedo y la puesta en escena de autoridad no son improvisaciones. Son parte de una estrategia calculada para abrir un espacio a un modelo de control más amplio. Bajo el pretexto de combatir el crimen, Trump sienta precedentes que le permiten intervenir en ciudades, federalizar policías y desplazar problemas reales hacia una situación de confrontación y espectáculo. Y yo les pregunto a ustedes, ¿creen que la intervención de Trump en Washington busca realmente garantizar seguridad o responde solamente a un intento de consolidar poder personal? ¿Cómo interpretan que se utilicen temas superficiales como el césped de los parques para encubrir decisiones autoritarias? Si este análisis te resultó útil, no olvides suscribirse, darle a like, comentar y compartir el video para seguir profundizando en cómo se manipula la situación política en Estados Unidos. Esto es Rumor de Estado. La publicación de las transcripciones de la entrevista de Ghislaine Maxwell y el vicefiscal Todd Blanche ha abierto una nueva grieta en el ya frágil intento de Donald Trump por controlar el relato en torno al caso Epstein. Lo que debía ser una estrategia de autoprotección terminó revelando el nivel de manipulación institucional que se está utilizando para blindar al presidente.
Is leaking the possibility through various news agencies that a transcript will be released of Todd Blanche's interview with Ghislaine Maxwell. There is no possibility that that transcript will include all of Todd Blanche's communication with Ghislaine Maxwell and her criminal defense lawyer, who is a personal friend of Todd Blanche. As Donald Trump kept rambling about Todd Blanche, and the reporter kept asking, but what about her? Donald Trump ignored that question, what about her, and didn't say a word about Ghislaine Maxwell. This time, Donald Trump did not say, I wish her well, which Donald Trump has said before about the woman who was convicted of recruiting children to have sex with Jeffrey Epstein and sexually abusing those children herself. Tonight, ABC News is reporting, quote, during her 9 hours speaking with Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche last month, Ghislaine Maxwell said nothing during the interview that would be harmful to President Donald Trump, telling Blanche that Trump had never done anything in her presence that would have caused concern, according to sources familiar with what Maxwell said. That was obviously the mission Donald Trump's criminal defense lawyer embarked on. Get Ghislaine Maxwell to say nothing that would be harmful to Donald Trump. And then Ghislaine Maxwell immediately got transferred from a serious federal prison in Florida, meant to house, among others, sex criminals, to the easiest federal custody facility that exists in America for women, which is not meant to house sex criminals like Ghislaine Maxwell. The rules had to be changed by Donald Trump's Justice Department to get Ghislaine Maxwell into that much more pleasant facility that is located in Texas near members of her family. Ghislaine Maxwell's lawyers lied today in a motion opposing the release of grand jury testimony in her case. The lawyers made the legitimate point that I've made on this program, that Ghislaine Maxwell's appeal is still pending before the United States Supreme Court. So grand jury transcripts should not be unsealed in a case that could conceivably go back for a retrial. That is a serious legal point. But the lawyers went beyond that and claimed that Ghislaine Maxwell is a scapegoat. That was their word. And that's the word that they want out there.
El hecho de que un funcionario del Departamento de Justicia con un historial directo como abogado personal de Trump fuera designado para interrogar a Maxwell muestra hasta qué punto la frontera entre defensa personal y deber público ha sido desdibujada. Lo que en apariencia era una diligencia judicial en realidad funcionó como un ejercicio de control de daños.
Just a few minutes, Martha. We've been looking through this, and we can tell you the top line here is that there's no client list, according to Ghislaine Maxwell, and there are no high-powered individuals that were on any sort of list. She did not incriminate anybody in that 9-hour interview that she did with the Deputy Attorney General, Todd Blanche. She said right here, quote, there is no list. We'll start with that. The genesis of that story I can actually trace for you is from its absolute inception, if that is what you're interested in. That's part of the DOJ transfer.
El resultado habla por sí solo. Maxwell no aportó ninguna información que comprometiera directamente a Donald Trump. Al contrario, declaró que siempre había recibido un trato cordial de él y llegó incluso a elogiar su trayectoria política. Esa afirmación, lejos de disipar dudas, alimenta la sospecha de que el interrogatorio fue diseñado para producir exactamente ese efecto. Una exoneración testimonial con apariencia de legitimidad. Lo más preocupante es lo que ocurrió después. Maxwell fue transferida de una prisión federal de alta seguridad en Florida a una instalación de mínima vigilancia en Texas, un proceso que en condiciones normales puede tardar meses y que en su caso se resolvió de manera express. La señal es clara. Quien coopera en proteger a Trump recibe beneficios inmediatos.
Bizarreness of this situation. Sex offenders are not allowed in that Texas camp, which I've heard referred to as Club Fed. So she gets a transfer from a prison in Tallahassee to a minimum security camp pretty much instantaneously overnight after she's visited by Todd Blanche, who was Donald Trump's personal criminal defense lawyer just 10 months ago. And he liked what he heard from her, Donald Trump's former defense lawyer, who's now deputized over at the Department of Justice. And he's apparently arranged for this transfer. Now, even for people who are allowed to be transferred, normally that's a process that takes months. You've got to demonstrate why there's some compelling reason you need to be moved from one facility to another, a change in the facts of your case or a change in the law. And then even if you're granted the permission to switch, it generally takes months to get off the wait list. Well, she bypassed that entire process and has just moved over to that facility. Obviously, the administration is sending the message to her that she will be rewarded for the proper cooperation. Blanche liked what he heard her saying in terms of Donald Trump, and we know that's all they've been concerned about. They're not concerned about the victims. They're not concerned about ongoing sex abuse trafficking, if there's any that's taking place. What they're concerned about is Donald Trump, because they had an army of more than 1,000 FBI agents working around the clock, searching for any mention of Donald Trump's name or any photograph or any video glimpse of him in all of these documents. So we want everything turned over. Like Donald Trump, we're demanding of the Epstein file, and we want a transcript and the original recording of all of his interviews with her, because they sacked one of the attorneys who had been on that case for a long time. He didn't bring any of the line prosecutors with him, and Todd Blanche engaged in that questioning or that conversation.
A esto se suma otra declaración de Maxwell. Según ella, no existe la famosa lista de clientes y Epstein no se habría quitado la vida. Ambas afirmaciones, en lugar de cerrar discusión, han generado un nuevo terreno fértil para las teorías de conspiración. El resultado es paradójico. Trump intentó silenciar el caso, pero lo único que ha conseguido es multiplicar las preguntas y alimentar el imaginario de su propia base política. La operación con Maxwell evidencia la prioridad de esta Casa Blanca. No son las víctimas, no es la búsqueda de justicia, sino la protección de un presidente que se encuentra cada vez más acorralado. Cada movimiento legal, cada beneficio penitenciario otorgado, cada testimonio cuidadosamente guiado refuerza la percepción de que la maquinaria del poder está funcionando como escudo personal de Trump. El caso de Epstein ya era sinónimo de impunidad y encubrimiento. Hoy, la estrategia de Donald Trump lo convierte también en un ejemplo del uso del aparato judicial como instrumento de autopreservación política. Y yo les pregunto a ustedes, ¿creen que la transferencia de Ghislaine Maxwell fue un simple trámite administrativo o fue una recompensa por proteger a Trump? ¿Hasta qué punto el Departamento de Justicia puede actuar como un brazo político en lugar de una institución independiente? Si les parece importante que estos temas se analicen con profundidad, los invitamos a suscribirse, dejar un like, comentar y compartir este video. Esto es Rumor de Estado. Lo que parecía ser una pugna interna en el Pentágono terminó convirtiéndose en un reflejo de cómo Donald Trump utiliza a sus secretarios como extensiones de sí mismo. Esta vez, el protagonista es Pete Hegseth, un funcionario cuya lealtad al presidente lo ha llevado a decisiones cuestionables, despidos arbitrarios y un manejo político de las Fuerzas Armadas que pone en entredicho la seguridad nacional. El escándalo más reciente comenzó con las filtraciones sobre su postura frente al despliegue de la Guardia Nacional. Mientras congresistas cuestionaban la inacción del gobierno de Trump durante el asalto del Capitolio el 6 de enero, Hegseth dejó claro que estaba dispuesto a usar fuerzas armadas en las calles cuando se trataba de proteger a instituciones alineadas con Trump, pero no cuando se trataba de defender la sede del Congreso bajo ataque. Un recordatorio rápido, si te está gustando este video no olvides suscribirte, comentar y darle a like. Dicho esto, seguimos.
National Guard was deployed here on January 6th, and that was a decision made by the Department of Defense. Do you support that decision? Do you believe that that was the right decision to deploy the National Guard to defend the Capitol on January 6th?
All I know is it's the right decision to be deploying the National Guard in Los Angeles to defend ICE agents who deserve to be defended in the execution of their jobs.
But I think it's important to know whether you think it was also important to have the National Guard defending the United States Capitol when there were violent protesters here on the president's behalf, to make sure that folks know that you care about protest, whether it's against the president or on behalf of the president.
Senator, I was in the Washington, D.C. National Guard when that happened and was initially ordered to go guard the inauguration of Joe Biden. But because of the politicization of the Biden administration, my orders were revoked. And ultimately, because of the politics that were being played inside the Defense Department by the previous administration.
But do you support the decision made on January 6th to send the National Guard here to defend
I
the
support the
Capitol?
decision that President Trump made and requesting the National Guard that was denied.
So you do not.
President Trump
you do not support the decision.
Support
you do not
for the
support
National
the
Guard
decision
in
to
advance
send the National
and was
Guard here
denied.
to defend the Capitol. I think that speaks to the worry that many Americans have that there is a double standard, that you are not willing to defend against attacks made on our democracy by supporters of the president, but you are willing to deploy the National Guard to protect against protesters who are criticizing the president. That's not how our taxpayer dollars are supposed to work. They're supposed to be used to defend the United States.
Esta doble vara expone un problema central. No se trata de seguridad ni de defensa institucional, sino de una obediencia política. La lógica de Pitt es la de un funcionario que actúa en nombre de Trump, incluso anticipándose a lo que el presidente dirá, aunque eso implique comprometer la neutralidad del Departamento de Justicia.
The police that don't work. I'm going to bring in the National Guard. I'm going to bring in federal marshals. I'm going to bring in the park police.
How long will
we're going
that
to control
be?
them.
How
Who
long
knows? How long? What is the?
Well, it costs money, right?
Sure, it does.
It costs money, and the question is, are you there for a year? Are you there for 6 months? And when the troops pull out, what happens?
I would call this conditions-based. I would say it's a situation where we're here to support law enforcement. And the more we can free them up to do their job, the more effective they can be, the more we can work. I mean, this isn't my realm, but the...
El episodio escaló cuando Hegseth destituyó al general Jeffrey Cruz, jefe de la Agencia de Inteligencia de la Defensa. La razón, un informe técnico que contradecía las afirmaciones de Trump sobre los bombardeos en Irán. El reporte indicaba que los daños eran mucho menores a los que Trump presumió públicamente. En lugar de aceptar la evaluación profesional, la respuesta fue el despido fulminante.
In the made-for-TV / ongoing national nightmare that is the second presidency of Donald Trump. Tonight, we are tracking two big stories coming out of the Department of Justice, although there's some others we'll discuss over the next 2 hours. The first being the FBI raid on the home and office of former Trump National Security Advisor John Bolton. You can see the pictures of them taking boxes out there. It started just after dawn this morning. It went on for nearly 8 hours. Bolton has become a prominent Trump critic and was talking about fear of retribution from the president as early as last week. We're going to have more on that story, but then hours after this news broke, the DOJ released the audio recordings of those highly irregular meetings. I mean, truly, truly anomalous, unprecedented, between Donald Trump's former personal defense attorney, the guy that, tried to get him cleared of criminal charges, who is now the #2 at DOJ, that guy, Todd Blanche, and the convicted sex offender, Ghislaine Maxwell. She, of course, notoriously, famously, the longtime confidant and enabler, co-conspirator of the late child sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein. Blanche announced that the 6 hours of recordings and 329 pages of transcripts were being released today, quote, in the interest of transparency, although it's not clear that that's all of their conversation. More on that later. Missing from the transparency, of course, is the obvious question, why on earth would the Deputy Attorney General take a private meeting with a convicted child sex trafficker who his boss, Donald Trump, has ties to, and then, as soon as she tells him what she told him, gets upgraded to a lower security federal prison? Now, that question remains unanswered. What we do know from the trove of materials they released is that much of the interview with Maxwell seems to be an attempt to support the narrative that surprise, surprise, the Department of Justice and Donald Trump have been pushing.
In any type of massage setting, I never witnessed the president in any inappropriate setting in any way. The president was never inappropriate with anybody. In the times that I was with him, he was a gentleman in all respects.
If there's one word that comes to mind with Donald Trump, of course, it's gentleman. He was a gentleman in all respects. But here's the thing. Maxwell did not stop there. She went on to tell the Deputy Attorney General of the United States that she, the lady who was charged with conspiring with Epstein to abuse minors, who's convicted of that and doing time for it, that she, get this, ready for this? That she never saw Jeffrey Epstein engage in anything that was non-consensual.
At some point, he was getting massages 7 days a week, sometimes multiple massages a day. Women have said that were there, that say they were there giving him massages, said that those included some sort of sexual conduct, however you define that in the broadest sense, not just a traditional massage regularly. So what did you see and hear at the time? Where does that leave you in your mind with what happened?
Okay, so I saw Epstein with women. What I mean by that is he would have women around him. So anytime I saw anybody with him, they were happy to be with him. So I never saw an aggressive move. I never saw anything that was
non-consensual.
Yeah, well, thank you. Okay. I never saw anything that was non-consensual.
Did you see him engage in sexual conduct during massages?
Well, you could define sexual conduct as in, I did see women who could have been, less than normally clad for a massage, but especially on the island where they would be in a bikini or possibly even topless. Yeah, I did see that.
Nope. Did you get all that? Didn't see anything. Women around him all the time, but seemed happy to be there. Everything was consensual. Jeffrey Epstein, the New York financier. Jeffrey Epstein with the island. Jeffrey Epstein never violated the
Este caso ilustra lo que senadores y demócratas republicanos han denunciado en repetidas ocasiones: la transformación de los organismos de seguridad en pruebas de lealtad personal hacia Trump. En lugar de garantizar que la inteligencia sirva para proteger al país, se la manipula para respaldar la situación política. Funcionarios convertidos en defensores personales, decisiones militares condicionadas por intereses políticos y un departamento de justicia que actúa como blindaje frente a los escándalos. Desde la gestión de Maxwell hasta la destitución de mandos militares, el hilo conductor es el mismo: aparato estatal que se mueve para proteger la imagen de Trump y castigar cualquier contradicción. El caso de Hegseth no es ningún error aislado, sino la confirmación de cómo Trump busca rodearse de figuras dispuestas a priorizar su lealtad personal por encima de la seguridad y la inconstitucionalidad del país. Una dinámica que erosiona la independencia de los organismos del gobierno y coloca a la democracia en un terreno cada vez más frágil. Y yo les pregunto a ustedes, ¿consideran que el despido general de Cruz demuestra un uso político de inteligencia militar? ¿Hasta qué punto la lealtad ciega de figuras como Pete Hegseth pone en riesgo la seguridad nacional? Si valoran este análisis y quieren que más personas comprendan la magnitud de estos hechos, los invitamos a suscribirse, dejar un like y compartir este video. Esto es Rumor de Estado.